Do you think that the machinery and the nerve neural brain structure is sufficient or will provide an explanation for what we experience as consciousness?
Yes. Well, I think that the first thing I want to say with this, of course, is there is a belief that, of course, the mind is not separate from the brain. I mean, that's the first thing. And the one thing that becomes very interesting is, as you know, in discussions of consciousness, there has been a discussion of Turing's paper in Mind. Now, what I hadn't realized till quite recently is that he called it an imitation game. It was not a simulation, you see. In other words, he was saying to you, I'm going to lock up in a room. In one room, I'm going to put a computer, and in one room, I'm going to put a human being. And you're only allowed to ask them a certain range of questions. And can you distinguish? Can a computer imitate a human being enough to con you, to actually do this? So it was called the imitation game. That's not the game we're interested in. I think that's doable. There was a very famous program called Eliza, which imitated a kind of psychiatrist confidant, which a lot of people loved, but it was completely silly because it just turned your question around, your statement around. For example, one piece of the conversation was, my boyfriend bugs me. The computer replies, does it bother you that your boyfriend bugs you? And when it got lost for how to follow up the conversation, it then said, you haven't mentioned your father or mother yet.
Sounds like a very good psychiatrist.
It was a very good psychiatrist, but it had nothing. And clearly it's not a human being there, but a very clever way of doing it. That's why I always think I could easily write a computer program to talk to royalty, because you're not allowed to initiate new topics when you talk to royalty. Anyway, besides that. So now let's look at this problem of consciousness. What I believe is that consciousness will not be solved in the way it's being put now, but it'll disappear. So I think the idea that there'll be some special part of the brain devoted to this, and that we'll finally find the seat of consciousness, that was, I think, is going to be misplaced. And I believe that in 50, 20 even years' time, people will look back and say, what were they talking about? Which I think is probably the most exciting thing about brains, is that even things we think are really fixed, by our genomes, have to be learned. In other words, the brain is essentially unfinished in most animals, higher animals. You get above a certain level of complexity. It then, and this depends on very interesting observation made by Hubel and Wiesel, very famous one, in which they showed that the brain wires back correctly, but if at a certain period in development, very early development, they closed one eye, the animal became blind in that field. It's called ocular dominance. And it was only seeing the eye which was really being... So we need to match the function of the neuron to what is on the outside. Again, then it's successful. So I think what we have is an unfinished thing, and then we learn to use it in a way that it matches our environment. And I think there's a most remarkable, simple case which we can all study and which hasn't yet been done properly. And that is, you can train muscle in a test tube. You can train it, okay? And I think that's where we start. And we know what it's all got, we know what it's got to do with. It's got to allow calcium to enter the cell. And I think all of synaptic learning, of muscle training is all that fundamental mechanism, which is, okay, we left an unfinished brain, finish it off the way it suits you.